Welcome back. It's our episode for our first year anniversary of Veil of Sound, and we thought we have to get somebody special on the show, and I'm more than happy to have Stephen O'Malley on the show, one of the masterminds behind Sunn O, one of the founders of Southern Lord Records, and much more. Stephen, thanks for being on our show.
Thanks to you, Thorsten.
Of course, one of the things that I have to ask you, what came first for you, the amp or the guitar?
It's interesting because neither. We've been doing some interviews recently about a band that Greg and I had called Thor's Hammer.
I know that.
Yeah, there's a magazine in the U.S. that has this Hall of Fame thing, and they want to put the recording that band, the only recording that band made, into the Hall of Fame of their magazine. And with that, it involves interviews with everyone who was involved with the recording. The recording was made in '94, so it's like pretty long time ago, but it's been really fun to talk about and try and remember what was happening there. So as far as the guitar or the amp, which came first, actually, I realized with that band, which was the first band that I really made recording with or played live, and the first band that Greg Anderson and I had together, which is kind of the genesis point of all of this stuff that you know about and the listeners know about, I didn't have any gear. I didn't even have a guitar with that band. It's ridiculous because obviously we're very into our gear now, but it's like almost 30 years later, but I didn't even own a guitar. So we were in these interviews trying to remember what I was playing, and it's kind of a mystery. But
for you yourself, a mystery?
I can't remember. I remember borrowing one guitar from a friend for a concert, but that concert's also been photographed, so it helps the memory. But in practice, I don't really know what I was playing. I think I was playing some of Greg's gear, but certainly by the time Sunn began, we were already really focused on the amplifiers, and that was '98. So that was a few years after Thor's Hammer. And myself, I really got into guitars later. Actually, in '98, I had I didn't own a guitar then either. I didn't own a guitar when Sunn started. That's right. I borrowed a BC Rich from a friend of mine who was in a band called Excruciating Terror. Okay. And for the concerts we played at the time. And I didn't have any amps either. I didn't own any amps or guitars except some shitty guitars from being a kid until Conate started, another band. And then I, in
a band that nearly nobody knows,
like 2000, 2001. And then I got into, what happened is I found the Travis Bean guitar.
Okay.
The aluminum neck guitar. And that was pretty early, 2001. And then I got really into those guitars, and they became the center of my sound, actually. But I had some Model Ts then too. I got my first Model T in '98 or '99. Greg already had a few, and he helped me find that first one. So it's a mix. I mean, the thing is, the guitar and the amp for the music I play, they're all part of a big circuit. I know a lot of guitar players are more about technique, playing the guitar themselves and everything. And I totally respect that and admire it. But I've never been a very good technical player. That's not the way I like the way I write music and stuff is it's working with technique, but more of the feedback technique of the guitar and the amplifier. That's
the technology.
That's how I describe my music, actually, is feedback music. So yeah.
Would you say that for you it's more about the possibilities of technology than the possibilities of technique?
It's a possibility of sound in a space and being inside that sound when it's happening. and
Mhm.
being sensitive to the way the sound moves and reacts. Yeah. And
Which
that
is a
involves
very good
technology.
description.
And that involves technology, of course, because we're talking about electricity, uh, electrical amplified sound, and all of the components in the circuit are from various eras of technology. So this is some pretty early technology in there, like levers. But then there's also, yeah, whatever
Mhm.
algorithmic computer chips. So
What I always like about seeing you on stage, no matter if it's with Sun or with our collaborative performances that you did, for example, with Boris, I think it was
mm,
4 years ago at Roadburn,
mm.
3 or 4 years ago. Um, it's always the way that one sees this massive wall of amps behind you. And what always strikes me, and that's also something that you indirectly referred to, you said being within that sound. Would you say that in some ways this performing or the performing of your music is always some kind of how far is man being able to stand within that sound? Because I
Uh,
mean, you had a massive wall. What was it, 12 or 16 amps behind you at Roadburn, which is
no, it wasn't that many amps. Maybe
wasn't it
speakers. No,
speakers?
maybe
Sorry, yeah,
speakers. Yeah.
yeah, and
It was
but when
probably
we look at
only
that,
it
it's
was probably only 5 or 6 amplifiers.
did you just say 5 or 6 amplifiers?
Just
But
five or six.
is it really the way that it's like the question of how far can you as a human being stand, act, perform within this massive wall of sound?
I see where you're going with this. Thorsten, for me, it's not about um how do I put it? It's not about an act of resistance,
Mm-hmm,
and it's not about an act of conflict.
mm-hmm,
Like I'm here, the sound is affecting me, and I'm
mm-hmm.
resisting it,
Good.
like a weightlifting or something.
Mm-hmm.
This kind of activity. There is, of course, endurance and stamina
Yeah.
involved, and physical endurance and stamina. But for me, the concept and the more philosophical way that I I like to imagine what's happening, which is then a kind of reality, at least in my uh, own mind, which I don't know how close to reality I'm usually at. But for me, it's about an encounter with um, the energy of the environment and the
Mm-hmm.
system we are in. On a, there's even a way to experience that for me that involves kind of a deep atomization
Mm-hmm.
of the body in space,
Mm-hmm.
because it's reminding the mind that we are sharing this type of vibrational structure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's pretty far fetched, and I don't even smoke weed or drink. I'm straight edge, actually. But
Me
so
too.
so, but I'm deeply affected by different types of philosophy and
Mm-hmm.
belief systems and science. So I think it's really incredible to be able to have a kind of like basic encounter with it that involves all these things instead
Mm-hmm.
of like I don't have anything to prove. It doesn't seem like it, but with the sound, it's kind of it's more of like a sharing of this phenomena. Yeah.
Yeah, and then it's also some kind of feeding off of the energy of the people that you affect life, I guess, right? So the
Well, I don't
reactions of
have.
the people that
I'm not affecting anyone. The sound is,
but yeah,
and we're
sorry,
sharing.
the
We're
way that
sharing that space.
but you again you feed off of the reactions of the people towards the sound that you are creating, right?
It's incredible the generosity of
Yeah.
sharing of that energy in a live performance. It's for me, it's really fundamental about the whole music. Uh,
Mm.
the reasons for doing music. Yeah, but I wouldn't say that I'm feeding them that or they're feeding me. I think we're sharing that. I mean, that's something
Good point.
that's different about Sunn. that I've always felt. Okay, of course, there's the spectacle, there's the performance, there's all of these things. We're on stage. It's a concert. Let's,
Yeah.
it's not in. Sometimes we're in a theater or a museum or a special place, and it has a different thing than just a concert. But I mean, what's incredible is that in that situation, we can have such like a rapport with everyone. Everyone can have a kind of
Mhm.
rapport. It's really special, I think. And a lot of bands and music have that. And that's one of the beauty of music. But this is the one I'm involved in. So this is the one that seems like exceptional. Yeah.
I found something when looking at your discography and all of that stuff for today. I witnessed something that I hadn't consciously witnessed before. And correct me if I'm wrong, but everybody perceives Sunn to be such a vastly philosophical and thoughtful, arranged, and highly, how should I say, highly reflected music, which it very
Really?
probably also is.
They
But
do.
um, yeah, I think a lot of
Thanks for
people.
saying
When
that.
I hear like, but I think there's also a lot of humor in the band. I mean, I looked at a few song titles of your My Wall, Flight of the Behemoth instead of Bumblebee, like My Wall, maybe something like Black Flag, Halloween instead of Halloween by. Is that something that is like insider jokes between you and Greg when you select those titles? Because most of your music is instrumental.
You're absolutely hit the nail on the head, Thorsten. It is. That's exactly I wouldn't say they're jokes in a way that's derogatory to anything. I just
No,
think it's so complex that, or we've made it so complex, it can have many, many, many aspects. It does have all those things. It can be deeply philosophical, reflected, even pretentious, even kind of like a staging of an idea in an appropriate place. Or it could be very simple and honest. And it can have both those things at the same time. And it can also have humor because it's very complex and there's a lot of people involved. So this subjective experience that we're proposing and experimenting with, we're not dictating to people what to feel and what to experience. In fact, quite the opposite as far as I'm concerned. It's super, super interesting to talk for me to talk with people like you about what you think it is. It's an abstract phenomenon. What is it? And you find that inside. And maybe I understand that or have the same opinion, or maybe I don't. Or maybe it's something I learned from your experience. And that's part of the rapport that we talked about in the last thing. I think it's really significant to have this sort of exchange and possibility. It's when there's feedback generated, or when there's feedback exists, the energy already exists. What the interesting thing with feedback is that energy is transmuted or transposed into sound energy, um, which then you feel the vibration of in the
Yeah.
case of sun, right? But that energy isn't made by us, or the electricity even. It's just a transmutation of existing energy.
And
So
it's also always your own attitude towards what you hear. What do you
you
bring to it?
everyone's mind is a filter for perceiving existence and experience. So we may be watching the exact same film or the exact same cat moving across the floor, and we may, who knows what our experiences are of that reality, color, sound, what we see, details, and everything like that. But in combination, that cat has more richness in our shared reality because of that. And for the songs, I mean, you chose three that have great. There are
I
also
have another one.
stories,
I
like
have another
my
one.
wall, my wall. Okay, so this was when we made this song, we made the music first, right?
Yeah.
And at the time, it was kind of, wow, this is a bit Pink Floyd. It's different for us because on the White albums, we were trying to do our original concept, we always say, was, oh, we'll make acoustic music on these albums to do something different. But what actually ended up happening was they became just more experimental in the studio. Now that was a different doorway for us at the time. So my wall, the music, we thought, this is a bit Pink Floyd, but we love Black Flag, so that was that. So and then the elaboration that Julian Cope, of course, did to the concept by connecting it to Neolithic earthworks in his region of England was genius, and he is a genius. By putting words to this abstraction, that's how our mind also forms concept. And you don't know about a reality. You only enter a reality if you have a concept of what it is. And this is why obviously why philosophy is so powerful. But my wall, I mean, it's a bit absurd, but you have two guitar players, you know. It's a bit absurd too. Halloween. It's a reference to Sonic Youth.
Mm-hmm.
What was the other one? Oh,
I have
Flight of the
one more. The other
Behemoth.
one, Flight of Behemoth, instead of Flight of Bumblebee. I mean, that's obvious.
I don't think that
but,
was my. I don't think I ever thought of Flight of the Bumblebee, but thinking about Manowar now, the bass player playing Flight of the Bumblebee solo or whatever, then it's no Flight of the Behemoth. That's kind of a metaphor. Like, why would a behemoth be flying? You know, it's
I
very
have one
stone.
more which I liked, which I also only recognized while doing the research. Is Gates of Ballard like a reference to, what was it, university or college where you and Greg met?
Well, actually, when you wrote that in the, you're so polite. You sent the questions beforehand. That
Yeah.
rarely happens in interviews, actually, and I really appreciate it because it moves in my mind for days before. So thanks for doing that. When you noted that title, immediately the explanation is there's a neighborhood in Seattle called Ballard. And this neighborhood is where there's a big Scandinavian community. And it's also the neighborhood where Greg lived for a while in his grandma's basement. And in that basement is where Greg and I first started writing riffs for Thor's Hammer. And Ballard has been a place where us and friends have lived. It's very cool. It's on the water. It was pretty raw in the 90s and everything. It's kind of like a Jerusalem for Sunn, you know. It's like like a mythological place that was important in our story. So the gates of Ballard actually are referring to there's these large railroad bridges that go over this locks, you know, this canals, and they go up and down, and they're called the gates of Ballard.
So now that you have mentioned this will of course become a place of pilgrimage for all Sunn fans.
Well, I hope so. But since you wrote it down, I realized that J.G. Ballard, the author, should also be mentioned, although I don't think that was the intention of this title. And then that spins the title in a very different way. Maybe that's actually quite important to think about contemporarily right now, because the author is dealing with a lot of topics and issues that I think have really come to life in a dark way in our society.
You have already mentioned your collaboration with Julian Cope for My Wall, and we all know that you, with Sunn, collaborate with many, many artists, and that you, as an artist, also yourself collaborate with a multitude and vast universe of highly influential artists. We've already mentioned Boris, and everybody can look up all the collaborations that you did. Is there an artist that you would still like to work with?
Of course. Yeah. I mean, for me, I'm really grateful that I've somehow had the opportunity to not only meet all of these really inspiring and creative, interesting artists, but and be inspired and be moved by their work and them as people, but to be able to like be friendly and collaborate on creation together. It's incredible. Like I said, I came from a, I mean, we're talking about Ballard. I came from the suburbs of Seattle, you know.
Mhm.
I barely made it out of there somehow, but it's amazing. I'm really grateful. And hey, the spirit of collaboration is really at the center of how I approach life. And I try my best, and it doesn't always work out, of course. But sometimes it does work out really well. Sometimes it works out for a very long time, like 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30, almost 30 years with Greg. That's crazy amount of time for collaboration. Sometimes it doesn't work out that long. Sometimes it doesn't work at all, you know. And I'm talking about creative ones, also personal ones. There are different types of relationships.
Yeah.
And with my music and art, some of those relationships have been around music and art. So it's also something that happens now, like the fact that Boris Atsuo and I have been able to collaborate many times on different projects. That's a great, and those were great experiences, and they
Yeah.
happened then. I don't know if we will again, maybe, but right now, today, I'm working with other people. It's really a real time thing. I don't have a bucket list kind of thing,
Well, I guess it's also a way
but
that your bucket list would be shorter than the number of lists that you are on.
well, no, I don't know, a bucket list. It's just kind of like, because then it's objectifying, and
Yeah.
it's not thinking about the surprise of meeting someone that's like, yeah, I just don't know about. Of course, I have my heroes and stuff. And so recently, one of my heroes asked me to collaborate, and I basically couldn't speak. It was crazy, and I have to get the courage to like come back. Somehow, it's like some of the people I've worked with, I've admired them so much, and maybe we got on it very well personally. But when we're actually making music, it's kind of like, oh, maybe this is too much for me. I can't. Maybe I should just be on the outside, like being too close to the flame, you know.
Yeah.
But
Too close to the flame, you get burned.
I hope I can add something to their experience, you know. It's good. I would wish that everyone who's making music could be open, and um, I think most musicians are. They're very open to try things with new people, just like
Mm.
trust their instincts and stuff, you know. Because it's a really special thing about music. You can already, when you meet someone who's in music, like me and you, we already share, oh, we're into music. So it's like we already come past that point of reference, but when you're playing as well.
You have a lot of releases basically every year. Um, would you describe yourself as some kind of workaholic?
I think this term is interesting because it's so American,
Yeah, it is.
and it's based around, well, I don't know.
Well, it is based
What
around
can,
the idea that too much work is not good for you.
right. And it's based around corporate structures, I think, too,
Yeah.
where you're kind of enslaved. But being an artist, just so excited that this is my life. I've been lucky to have all these opportunities to do all this stuff.
Mhm.
And in retrospect, maybe I shouldn't have released all of those recordings that I did, but at the time it seemed right. And maybe someday there's going to be someone out there who's like, this artist is interesting. I'm going to write a story about all of these things and find and analyze the threads and make the connections and stuff like that. But what can I say? There's also something like on the personal side that you can lose track of life a bit, being so obsessed, especially with traveling. And
Mhm.
I've certainly, uh, I've tried to have, you know, a happy life with regards to relationships and family and stuff like that. I've tried. It's been very difficult. And if I have a regret about all that stuff I've done is workaholism, as you mentioned, it would be that, yeah, it's a big sacrifice also too, in some sense, depending on your point of view. But it's very complex. There's many sides of it, and we have this role in the world that we're given, this calling.
Mm-hmm.
A friend of mine says there's a difference between someone who's doing something and someone who has a calling
That's
to
true.
do it. It's a good point. I always think about that. My friend Jesse Sykes said that. Amazing singer. I've been able to collaborate on a few really special things. Her respect and love a lot. She said that, and it kind of describes something like there's different roles and for different people in this world,
And also different roles for different people at different points in their life. That's
Absolutely.
also, of course.
Absolutely.
So,
of course, I want to say another thing, Thorsten. The past 2 years have redefined work for everybody,
yeah,
and me too. And I've never had a chance to like pause for months, and since I was a teenager, I guess. And although it's been challenging and difficult in many, many ways, especially through the lockdowns, for me, and I think a lot of people, the temporality of, or the experience of the different possible temporalities through that has been really positive. And I know that I've been very blessed with opportunity in my life to make music, but there's also a lot of more space of life outside of that showed me that period.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like the possibility of stepping out of your own everyday rhythm and also evaluating that rhythm is, of course, something that is really good for everybody.
Absolutely.
I have a few more questions, and I hope that you don't mind if we spend like another 8-9 minutes together.
Sure. Let's go.
Very often, or sometimes, let's say sometimes, you used the abbreviation for yourself, SOMA, SOMA, at least a few times. I'm very sure that you are aware that that is also a drug in Huxley's Brave New World, aren't you?
Yeah, and that reference is going to a historical precedent for a mythological or actually archaeological identified kind of intoxication system involving
Exactly.
a kind of wine or drink that probably was made in many cultures through either the fly agaric mushroom or various types of psilocybin based mushrooms for shamanic or spiritual rites. And that's just a pure coincidence that my initials are like that, but it's one I like also.
Oh, that would have been my question. Yeah. You've already spoken about being inspired by lots of philosophers and theories. Sorry. Is that like one of your favorite kind or favorite subjects in literature, be it fictional or non-fictional, like this? I definitely do not want to say occult, but philosophical ideas of being, of human life.
I have a huge curiosity for so many topics. In fact, it's like one of my friends, like, you're curious about everything. And those topics you just mentioned are some of those. Yeah. There's a writer I like recently named Roberto Calasso, who is writing fiction, a kind of fiction about super interesting crossing of topics of anthropology, mythology, language, time, and evolution. And here, I'm going to show you a book. There's this book called that I'm super into right now called The Celestial Hunter. I think the screen's backwards anyway. And this the writing in this book is just so inspiring and amazing that it crosses this moment when he's thinking and discussing this moment in the human evolution when the human obtained autonomy from the environment, mm-hmm. like separated from the environment, separated from the systems of cosmic clocks or animal migrations or geology, or and became a entirely different entity. But what's interesting about that, the writing, is that he's writing using references from mythology and psychology, and writing as an author, of course, and giving a real sense of like, what would it have been like to live as a human before that autonomy? Like, what are the ideas? How would you relate? What did this animal mean? How could it have defined a structure of a hunt? Like, he spends a lot of time about hunt, sacrifice, the stars, shamanism, obviously, things like that. And so that kind of crossing ground is very up my alley. I'm very into occult literature too, but when I was younger, I think it was more definitely a kind of escapism for me. As the decades have gone on, though, I've just continued to buy books. A lot of them are made by small book publishers and are like artworks. And actually, now my opinion about occult literature now is that it's activating the imagination in a very strong way for the people who are writing it and or practicing it or thinking about it. And in that way, it's an art form that I think is valuable for those people. And I'm very into publishing and printing arts as well, and that crosses over there.
Southern Lord and Sunn are like the flagships of your endeavors. At least that are the things that you are most known for. Although you are doing a lot of other things as well, and Southern Lord not being your only kind of label. Are those two also necessary money-wise? Do you have to have those two flagships bringing in enough of money to also do the other projects that you're doing that are highly interesting, but maybe not selling that much?
Well, there's two things. One, I was very involved in Southern Lord in the very beginning, up until and then later, up until about 2006 as a designer and art director. Yeah. But I want to point out, like, even if at the very beginning of the label, Greg and I were doing everything together, it's always been Greg's label and Greg's company too, as far as the business is concerned. And then these days I'm an artist, in a band on the label. It's not my label, actually. In the very early days, of course, the label started, the first two releases were Thor's Hammer and Burning Witch. So the creation story is there. Yeah. As far as the business, this is what I do. So yeah, the record sales in the band, especially the live, that's my job also. It's not just my passion. And I don't lean on, I wouldn't say it's so compartmentalized that one is funding the lack of something for another. For me, I've always thought about it as like, how big is this barrel and how many places can I scrape the barrel? And there's so many different channels of coming together that manage to keep this lifestyle and path going. It's not so stable, but what can I say? I'm very grateful to where I've gotten with on that side too. It's kind of incredible. But certainly Sunn probably sells more albums. But as far as for me, is we don't. Sometimes we play a lot of concerts, and that's a nice job when that happens. But I do a lot of different things, and not as a side thing of Sunn. It's just like the big picture. There's many things that keep us going, and a lot of it is kind of non-commercial stuff actually. So Sunn is probably the more commercial side of things. Commercial being there's products made, there's promotion. The product sales are significant enough that it's a business, because I do records too that are selling on tiny labels, 300 copies, and that's nothing. That's like a hobby thing, for the
That's
label.
like a hobby thing, but musically also very interesting.
Sure, there's an outlet to try other ideas. When I do a record like something recently came out of a project I did with Thurston Moore and Mats Gustafsson, kind of an improv noise record, really beautiful artwork on the cover. I got to make a nice packaging for it. It's an interesting document. It's not a genius composition or anything, but people are into it. And it just came out as 300 copies. And that's fine. That's fine. It's an artwork. I guess
they're sold, right?
Sure. And it's an artwork. It's an artwork, in the story. But when Sunn puts out, when we do the last 3 albums, especially, it's been very, very calculated. Like, how many do we need to press? What is the demand? We need to press in Europe for this market, and States for this market, also for shipping. I mean, Greg is a genius with this stuff. He is like, he's made Southern Lord. Obviously, he built that out of his closet, in a 1-bedroom apartment in '98, into this entire universe around it. It's a whole thing. And
universe is a good description.
Yeah, the Southern Lord universe. It's got a whole history and amazing characters and scene. There's a scene around it that's changed many times, developed. But yeah, so these kind of calculations on like how to make the most of it, as far as reaching the most people with the records, getting it around the most, keeping the price down as low as possible, but also having it be enough that it can recuperate the investment, and then also pay royalties, of course, so we can continue. He's a genius with that. It's but it's also just amazing that Sunn is at a level where that's important. It's abstract music. It's not running wild, or Maiden.
Okay, you really mean the German band? Okay, I was just like, did you just refer to a bad German band? Okay.
Well, okay. Something that could be commercialized.
Yeah, I know. And Running Wild is a very good example of that. I was just like, oh my God.
Oh, they're like a speed metal band that wanted to be very popular and had some crossover appeal, like in the mainstream, but didn't really make it.
They were very popular.
But they didn't really make it, like.
No, that's true. But they're big over in Germany and the Netherlands and stuff. So
yeah,
I have 5 short questions.
Okay.
My quick fire questions. And you decide on one of the alternatives and give, if any explanation, then a short explanation. ISIS or our Old Lady Drivers?
ISIS or Old Lady Drivers?
Yes, you have to decide between one of them. Aaron's band or Plotkin's old band?
I would say Old Lady Drivers.
Okay.
You're talking about my taste, right?
Yeah. You just choose one of them.
Okay.
Canate or Burning Witch? Which might we get new music?
Both of those bands broke up a long time ago. That's what I could say then.
Yeah, I had to ask.
And all the recordings, We've been pretty thorough with the releases.
which is good. But you know,
Yeah.
old fanboy heart had to ask.
I know, I know. And thank you for being that old fanboy. I appreciate it. Because I am too. Those were cool times.
Yeah. Recording your own music or touring?
Right now, I think composing.
Mm-hmm. When touring in Europe, London's BBC Studios or O13 in Tilburg?
Oh, come on, you don't do that to me.
I have to. There is always one question where every says don't do that. And that is the one for you.
Let me put it this way. I love Walter and I love Roadburn, and Roadburn's been very supportive of us. But being in the temple of John Peel, it's pretty hard to beat. It's a very different situation. So Marianne Hobbs made that happen for the second time for us because we went to the John Peel studio for Peel session, actually.
I know.
Yeah, 2003, which is incredible enough. But then Marianne Hobbs, our friend, who's supported us crazily too, has invited us for another time. It was so cool. But we had a Roadburn moment with two vocalists on stage, Keiji Haino and Attila Chihar, and during the same set. And after the show, Greg and I were just like, what are we gonna do now? Maybe we should just stop the band. It was just like, there's been some incredible stuff at Roadburn for sure. And O13, I hope we get a chance to play there again.
We hope so too. My last question, which is a little bit of a fun question. French cheese or Monterey Jack?
Well, French cheese.
I would have not guessed any other thing.
The impossible question would have been French or Italian cheese. That's the real challenge.
If you ask my 9-year-old daughter, it's always provolone.
Yeah. I think
but for me, it's something different. 9 years old and she loves cheese.
We're lucky we get to have this dilemma.
Yeah. My brother-in-law would say first world problems.
Yes, exactly.
Stephen, it was a blessing to have you on the show. We wish you all the best for the next months and years. And we, of course, even though you already released a live album in November or December, we cannot wait for new music by Sunn. Thank you very much for being on our show.
Great. Thanks, Thorsten. It's been a pleasure talking with you. Thanks for having me.